Hope you're enjoying the day. I'm having a great day. And thank you for being in this session that is going to look at podcasting for business as opposed to any other kind of podcasting. The slide you're seeing on the screen shows a photograph of three people. I'm the one on the right. The one on the left is a fellow called Shel Holtz, who is based in California. He is my podcasting partner on a podcast he and I have been doing since 2005. Every Monday we do this show. It's called For Immediate Release, the Hobson and Holtz Report. And it's an hour or so talking about business communication technology, that intersection of those topics. So we've been doing this for a while, since the very early days of podcasting. The third person in that picture is a lady called Elizabeth Albright, an American living in Paris. In fact, when that picture was taken in 2006, it was actually at a conference where Shel and I were doing live shows at the conference. It was in Silicon Valley. So that's why I look so young there, I have a feeling. I don't look like that now, I don't think. So we've been doing it a while, and I'm going to talk a bit more about FIR, as it's abbreviated, a bit later in this session. As you can see there, we're looking at two segments to this. One is the how-to. How do you go about podcasting? Why would you? And then I'm going to look at it more from the engagement and community building point of view. And there's some interesting things in there that if you're in business, whatever size you are, whether you are big global corporation running a department or working in a department, or whether you're a small business, an entrepreneur, whatever you might be in your business, I'm hoping that I will be able to illustrate to you why podcasting is worth considering to achieve specific and measurable business goals as part of all the other things you might be doing to connect with the people you want to connect with. My Twitter handle is Jangles, so if you want to tweet, that's the name you put, please. Like mine's, of course, the hashtag FIR, if you'd like to add that as well. So, as I mentioned, Shel and I do this show. He and I also wrote a book called How to Do Everything with Podcasting. Much of what you're going to hear today is in that book. I'm not here to peddle the book, but if you want to buy it, it's on Amazon. There's also a Kindle edition. It was published in 2007. Special like mine's rate. It was published in 2007. A lot of the how has moved phenomenally in 5 years. But the strategy, the business planning, the reasoning from a business point of view are still absolutely valid today. And I've yet to find another podcasting book that addresses that topic. So much of what you hear today is in that book. So what is a podcast? And here, by the way, we're talking of audio podcasting primarily. I remember the day when it was just podcasting. Then there was video blogging. That's been referenced today already. But it's audio. It's typically an MP3 file. That's how it's always been. One reason it's MP3 is it's cross-platform. It works on just about anything. It has disadvantages, audio quality being one, although that's advantageous from a bandwidth point of view. But mostly now is in terms of the tagging, adding content to an MP3 file so you can see what it contains. Difficult to do that. Typically, most podcasts for business are in a radio show format, like talk radio. The advantage is this thing called time shifting, which was a big topic back in the day people were talking about. Lets you listen when you want, as opposed to at 8 o'clock, because that's when the radio is broadcasting it. So that's one of the advantages. Delivered via RSS, big deal in the last decade. Not so much now, although if you think about it, if you use iTunes to subscribe to anything, it's done via RSS, actually. That's kind of in the background now. We don't talk about it too much. So that's the core element of an audio podcast. You've also got the optional aspects of it. Auto-synchronizing with portable players, meaning you can listen where you want, and that's now very common. Although I tend to listen to most of my podcasts either at my desk or in the car. Rarely do I have earphones plugged in on a train or anything, mainly because I don't travel by train that much. That's probably why. Complemented by show notes, a descriptive place on the web that describes your show, so people know where they can get it, where they can find out information about it, plus the SEO benefits of having that kind of resource. It also provides a home for people to engage with you, and that's a very, very important element of the reasoning why you'd be doing this. I'll be covering that a bit later. So the RSS thing is important just to peripherally understand why this is so important. It's a delivery channel, and indeed, if you subscribe to anything on the web, it typically comes to you via this bit of technology working behind the scenes in how you get the content into the program or tool that you might be using to get that, a website, something else, audio, video, whatever it is. It lets you get it when you want. It's usually from trusted sources because you're subscribing to it. If it turns out not to be trusted, well, you unsubscribe. It's that simple. Discoverability aspect of it. It enables tools like iTunes to find your stuff and package it in a way that is transparent to you, the subscriber. All you do is click or tap, and you get the content. It's that simple. But in the day when all this started, this was a huge step forward. That was a great part of the, if you will, the democratizing of content on the social web. Now we don't think about this. It's kind of part of the furniture. But it is quite key if you're interested in understanding the origins of all of this and how it came about. This is a screenshot I did yesterday, actually, of a preview view of the business podcast listing on iTunes. And this is the top half of the screen. I clicked 14 times on the scroll bar, and it still hadn't finished with the list of all the podcasts. So this tells you that podcasting for business is mega these days, in case you didn't know. Most of it's American. Never ceased to amaze me that in this country there's very little of this outside of the mainstream media, big corporations, I'm thinking banks in particular do a lot of this stuff, and very promotional stuff by other companies. Very little of the style that Shell and I do, which is more the kind of open element of much of what I've been hearing about today at Like Minds. And I often wonder why that is. The barriers to entry for this are almost zero, which I'll talk about that in a second. But if you go looking for business podcasts, iTunes is a great place to start, and this gives you an indication of the kind of stuff you can find there. So why would you podcast? Is a question I am asked a lot by people. Why would I do this when there are other things that I can do to spend my time? I have no interest in audio, and I don't think anyone I know does. Well, actually, if you think about your own behaviors, you listen to the radio, there's possibly a talk show that you might enjoy listening to, and there may well be podcasts you subscribe to. But what we're talking about here is looking at some particularly key business benefits that are measurable to judge whether they've been successful or not, as part of many of the things you might do in your communication, if you're in public relations, for example, or in marketing, or indeed just simple business outreach. And I can think of more than you'll see in this slide deck as to the reasons why it's worth doing. As the slide shows, it complements other activity. It's very easy to do. It can be an appropriate tool in many ways. If you think about audio, it lends itself well to certain types of content. A narrative, two people talking. It doesn't lend itself well to things where there's lots of sound, lots of audio. That doesn't lend itself too well. Video might be better for that. But in terms of talk show, getting across a point, instructional, something guiding, it is quite useful, particularly when it complements other communication material. And what you're doing is providing content in a way that many people like using the way audio is used. It lets you reach niche audiences that otherwise wouldn't be financially feasible. So you could do a podcast at very low cost, doesn't require a studio, and make it available to people, and the cost truly is minuscule. The server hosting cost, maybe some bandwidth cost and stuff like that. Your time has a value, of course, but you're not laying out pounds. You don't need someone to produce this for you. And that's one of the things I notice many people have a difficulty getting a handle on, is this kind of thing, well, I don't think I'll be very good at this, or it doesn't sound professional. Well, it may not sound professional, I would argue, but it sounds authentic, and that's what people like. It doesn't mean to say it's got to be a crap audio production, far from it. In those early days, most podcasts were awful, frankly. If I listen back to some of the early episodes Shell and I did, they were terrible audio quality, because no one knew how to do this. There wasn't a manual or a guide, so you kind of figured it out as you went along, made lots of mistakes. People would tell you, your podcast sucks big time, but I like the content. Can you improve it, please? Or something like that. It was great. So it helps you attract different types of customers. Not necessarily younger, as the slide says, although that has been what many other podcasters said they have achieved with this. It creates buzz. People talk about what they've heard, and if the content's compelling, you have a word-of-mouth effect. And that's something we've experienced in the history of the show that we do. You can be perceived to being at the leading edge of something if this is something people haven't seen from you before, this kind of content medium. although I'm not so sure that's such a big deal so much as it was in the early part of the last decade. You can be seen as a leader with a new medium if no one else is doing this in your company or in your organization or in your market. Suddenly you've got something that is a little bit different. And there are many, many other reasons that you might think of as well. One thing before I go on to the next slide, let me ask you a question. Does anyone here create a podcast? No, not really. It's kind of a sort of, okay. Okay. So existing content, you podcastify it in a sense. Okay. Well, in that case, the answer is still valid. You create a podcast. So does anyone listen to podcasts? Okay, let me ask quickly, what sort of podcast? Music, business, what type? Combination, social media? Okay. Sorry? Current affairs? Music, right, the common. I listen to lots of music podcasts myself too. Business? Okay. So you're familiar with it. Does anyone have one thing they think, those of you who listen to podcasts in particular, one thing you think could be improved in the content delivery? What would that be? Would anyone care to shout out an answer to that one? Caitlin? Table of contents? Right, so you'd like to know what the content was in the file itself. Okay, chapters, yeah. You can do that with iTunes on an iPhone or an iPod using Apple's proprietary file format. It lets you segment your content into chapters and describe them as such. It shows on the screen of the device. But that's a proprietary format. Hasn't taken off. MP3 doesn't let you do any of that, so there's a huge trade-off. And I often wonder when this is going to evolve into something that it has all the values of MP3, but lets you do that. Hasn't happened yet. Hence, we do web pages with show notes and track listings and all that kind of stuff as kind of workarounds until we're able to do it better. So it's interesting. Thanks for your comments on that. That's interesting to know that we're not a totally obscure audience here, all of us, with me trying to explain the fundamentals. You know all of this stuff. Another question related, are any of you thinking about creating a podcast? Okay. That I'm very pleased to see that. That's obviously why you're here, of course. My next question is why you're here. Don't need to answer that. So why podcast? Let me continue this theme now. These are just ideas that float out. You might be wondering, why doesn't he have any examples? Well, I don't have many of third parties. I've got quite a bit coming up of stuff in our shows to illustrate points. I did have examples for these, but they're not doing them anymore, the ones that I thought were really good. So for instance, marketing communication, a good example was BMW, the car maker. They stopped doing that. So I figured, okay, fine. You can look and find some, and I don't want to get into the often subjective discussion about are they any good, because that's a very subjective thing. Most of the ones that I encounter, in my personal view, are lacking the compulsion to listen. They're very slick. They're just like radio. That's actually not what I personally want. I want the humanity of the presenters to come out, not the scripted slickness of professional presenters. So I can go to the radio for that. Except for The Economist, I would add, because I listen to The Economist. I love that. So marketing communication. Here's an idea. New product announcement that accompanies your traditional communication. So you've got a new widget or a new washing machine or a new car model, and you're doing all of the things that you'd expect. The gorgeous video maybe, you've got the website, the microsite, you're on Twitter, Facebook, all the social networks, the works. You're doing all of that stuff. Audio, complement it. So there you might have, as the slide shows you, informal conversation between a customer and one of the employees in the factory who made the product. That would be totally awesome to do that, particularly if you've never done anything like that before, where all your communication has been the professional, normal stuff we do all the time. Nothing wrong with that. Here you've got something that gives you insight into the soul of the business. Imagine the impact that has. BMW did that. It really was cool. Financial public relations. So investor relations does a weekly review of activities and events of interest to people in the investment community and the financial communities particularly. IBM used to do that. They used to do a regular show that talked about IBM, the business, and it was aimed at the investor and financial communities. You might think, so what has that got to do with investors and the financial community? On the face of it, nothing. Yet, think about it. everything, because it helps them understand IBM's business. And it did it in a way that IBM, being a publicly listed company, did not infringe any regulatory restriction on how they were communicating with the financial market. So their podcasts were not about finance or investor relations. They were about IBM's business. They had insights. They talked about future trends. They talked about who was using their technology and what they were gaining from it. They were fabulous. And they stopped. I don't know why, to be frank. And they're doing other things now, in fact. But those were groundbreaking at the time. Big, button-down corporations. Suddenly, this informality of 2 or 3 people sitting in a room chatting like talk radio. But it was very amateurish, and that was endearing. So, employee engagement internally within the organization. Imagine, I knew someone who did this. Actually, it was the sales director of this particular company who used to do a weekly podcast for the sales team, which was dispersed all around the country. And in those days, this was going back 5 years, it wasn't as easy to get the server and get IT to help out and all that kind of stuff, but it happened. And it was very, very engaging with that community of employees. But imagine, CEO does something, business update for employees. Now, and that now happens in many organizations. But in my view, many of them are far too corporate, and people tune them out. What you want is something personal, where the CEO might sit there with a microphone. Now, of course, you might even suggest he or she sits there with a webcam on the laptop and just talks for a bit. But it's interesting, the ideas that are not difficult to think of, that come up with, you think, hey, these are valid reasons why I might want to do this, and I can measure whether they're effective. So customer engagement, discussing topics of interest to specific types of customer that you'd find hard to justify maybe doing in other forms of communication. Complexity and the cost, time. This is simple. Give them exclusive information. Give them a reason to listen other than the compelling content, in which case you then project it out into community building and things like that with certain types of customer. So lots of ideas that could work for you. So what got all this going and what is still valid today? The growth drivers, it is very easy to do, which we'll come to in a second. It's very low cost. It's portable, laptop is often all you need. It's available, meaning that everywhere you look, you can find this content. The screenshot shows 3 types of device that play the content. The top one is an MP3 player, the one I use, Winamp actually, on a Windows machine. But whatever's on your computer will play audio. The bottom 2 are from mobile devices, on the right from an iPhone, on the left from an Android phone. So nowadays, the means with which you can get hold of content and consume it are 100-fold to what they were 10 years ago. So this is ubiquity, without any doubt. And yet, it hasn't really taken off in this country. Business podcasting has not really taken off. So go back a bit, think about in America, it took off hugely over there as an alternative to radio. People don't like radio too much over there. It's a comment I frequently hear. When I go to the States, I must admit, I don't really like it much myself either. Here we don't have the same situation. Radio here is pretty good. So it hasn't really taken off in the way it has in the States. There are some rules that are ones I see others talking about too. People who've been doing this for a while. And these, to me, make quite a lot of sense. I'm not going to read them all. You can read these yourselves. But a couple to highlight that stick out to me. Be relevant. You might think, well, yeah, but you'd be surprised perhaps at how many podcasts I listen to, certainly. And I look at the description, and I listen to content that doesn't match the description because the presenter's off topic and maybe doesn't realize it. So you need to stick to what you say you're going to talk about, otherwise you will lose listeners. Practice infotainment. Just because you've got a story to tell about the latest widget doesn't mean to say you can't make it entertaining. Think about the presenters we've heard this morning. This was entertainment we went through. I'm probably the driest presentation so far today. This is a bit factual how-to at the moment. But practice infotainment to engage people. And that's probably one of the top 3 aspects of this, rules, if you will. Be mindful of your audience's time, something that Shell and I fail with a lot, although people tell us they don't mind. We tell them we're doing a 60-minute show, we do an 80-minute show. But be mindful of your audience's time, that people don't have a lot of time. Our show is not for everyone because it's pretty long. I listen to other long podcasts, and often you don't have time to listen to it all. Many people say to me, well, I like them in 10 or 15 minutes. Okay, there are podcasts like that too, and indeed you could aim for that, which keeps your production time down as well. You don't have to do it long. Don't advertise or sell, and that's something I've noticed a bit. At the risk of offending all my marketing friends, particularly those out there in like-minded land who might be watching this, when the marketers get involved, that's when you get that kind of discussion happening. Well, let's just get the brand mentioned. Let's put in a brand message. Resist that if you can. You damage your authenticity in the minds of your listeners. And integrate into the community. That we're going to talk about in a bit. So producing your podcast, if you're thinking, okay, how am I going to do this? It's actually really dead simple. The basics, you just need a microphone, and it could be a USB microphone. Plugs into USB ports. There's loads of them. Go to PC World or any of those places, Amazon actually, buy them online. A headset even will do. Free recording software. There's a product called Audacity, which has been around since the very early days. They've just released a brand new version. It's cross-platform. That would work. And that's it. You're good to go. That's literally all you need. You've got the computer already, your laptop. Don't try and produce a podcast, by the way, using the inbuilt microphone on a laptop. Don't. Get a good microphone. 20 quid, maybe 50. 20 to 50 and you're good. You can get started with this. All your investment is because you've got the rest of the stuff. You will need a place to deliver your MP3 files from, but there are hosting services out there who will do it for free. And depending on the frequency of your podcast, if you've got a blog or that kind of thing, you can run it from there too. So there's your basics to get you going. Intermediate, a decent microphone, like this is a good example. A mixer, bit of hardware, like the guys in the box at the back, but not as sophisticated as what they have. Some higher-end software, like, for instance, on Windows, I use Adobe Audition. It's getting a bit long in the tooth, and it's part of a different suite Adobe makes now. GarageBand on the Mac, and indeed other software that's available on different platforms. So that's a bit of an investment in the hundreds of pounds, probably. So your cost there could range that kind of level. Then you get to the high-end area, and that's where you've got digital mixers, compressors, preamps, almost professional studio equipment. And then you're looking at $1,000 upwards, $5,000 potentially. I mean, quite a lot of money. Shell Holtz, my podcasting partner, has a microphone in his home studio, which is, I think he told me, about $1,200 American. My microphone, the one that I use for recording, if I recall, was £150. So it's worth investing a little bit in a good microphone. But that's really how you get started. But that's not the only way to do podcasting. There's another way where the barriers to entry are even less than this. And that is, oh, sorry, yeah, I've got this one, this slide too. This shows you simply what an audio file looks like in an editing program like Adobe Audition. That's known as a waveform where you can see what the audio is, which you can then pinpoint how to edit. And of course, podcasting is recording, not necessarily live. So you have the luxury, if you've got a bit of time, and once you do this, you get to know quite quickly what to edit, how to edit, what not to, for naturalness. Like you might want to edit out long gaps, coughs, or someone might say, listen, I'm not happy with the way I did that, let me take that out. You definitely need to edit that out. So this is kind of what it looks like. So you've got other devices, and indeed I've got one here that I use, which looks a bit like a taser, people often tell me, but this is called, what's this one called? The Handy Recorder H4n, made by a company called Zoom in Japan. This costs about £300. It's a digital recorder onto an SD card. And it lets me also connect full-size cabled microphones, like this one I'm speaking into in the back. This thing at the top, these are the directional microphones. And I use this when I'm interviewing people out in the road. And I do that at events like this, for instance. Grab someone for a 5-minute quick chat. But the slide shows many others too. My colleague Shell Holtz uses a Marantz, which is one of the devices you see there. Even an Olympus voice recorder will do if it has the ability to transfer the content to a PC or a Mac. So you've got all sorts of microphones, all sorts of input devices. The other one I should mention too, which most of you have, in fact all of you, is this. This is a podcasting device. So you've got inbuilt software on this. I can't tell you how many apps are already here on this Android device of mine. There's at least 3 inbuilt. And I've got a couple of additional ones I've added, which I'm going to mention in a sec. So since we started, things have moved hugely. And so you are really faced with the ease with which you can get started. It is really very, very simple. You've now got tools like this that you see on the screen. Audioboo. Anyone used Audioboo? Okay, those of you who haven't, give it a try. It's a web service that has an iPhone app and an Android app, and I think they've now got a Windows Phone app as well, or on the website itself. It's pretty sophisticated compared to the early days when they started. But you speak into your iPhone or your Android phone, typically, and record, stop, add a title and some tags maybe, and a photo if you want, and publish and uploads it to your space on Audioboo. They've evolved quite a lot since they started. Now there's paid versions. This is free, but this is paid, gives you longer time, things like that. And I see a lot of the mainstream media using Audioboo. When reporters are out at events, they'll have an audio thing and they'll publish their content to Audioboo. It's all very open, eminently shareable. You have Sync, that's in the States. Another service that's taken off pretty big in the States, not really happened here. I think last time I used it, it required an international call to an American number. It works with Skype, by the way, so it's cheap to do. You've then got SoundCloud. Anyone using SoundCloud? Yeah, it's maybe more familiar with that. In my view, it's sort of like Audioboo, but a little bit different. Another thing you can experiment with. So you've got tools like that, and there are lots of others too, I would add. But these are probably the big ones. There's another one, iPadio, that uses phone, typically, to ring in. Their strength is in the not the consumer market necessarily, it's aimed more at enterprises, but it's actually, they've been around quite a while. They have a very good service too. These are probably the ones that most people are familiar with, and these are worth giving a go, particularly Audioboo. You've also got different ways of consuming the content. You don't need to subscribe. People say to me sometimes, I can't be bothered with all this. I've got to click somewhere, go and get this stuff on a device. It downloads the file. You know, I'm at home and my cell signal's not big and I got this 60 megabyte file downloading. I want to stream it. Well, here's a new thing. I came across this just last week, player.fm. A guy who used to work for Google, he's actually based here in the UK in London. He just wrote this web service. It's in the cloud, and it lets you set up an account, set up your podcast playlist from the RSS feeds. It brings them into a web page like this. You then share it with all your friends. So I've created a list of the 14 podcasts I listen to most, and they're up there, and anyone can listen to it. And you click, and it plays it from the web page. It's great. It does it on a mobile as well, so not just your desktop. And the mobile browser, the one I use on my Android phone is Google Chrome. They have a version for Android, but the inbuilt browser also works. I hear people saying it works fine on an iPhone and on a Windows phone. It's all in the browser. And you think to yourself, you know, apart from anything else, is this another indicator that we're moving to browser-based delivery rather than apps in particular? Well, that's a question for another session, not this podcasting one. Point is, even easier to get hold of the content. And as you can see from the screenshot, it pulls up the descriptive information about the podcast that the creator has embedded in the tags in the MP3 file, the associated very brief descriptions that it does come with. And so it gives you the ability to easily do this. And I'm rapidly inclining towards this instead of the other ways I currently listen to podcasts, because it's a lot easier. So that's kind of the how-to. And we're going to talk now about community. Before we move on to this, though, does anyone have a burning question about the how-to they've got to get out right now? Yes. Right. So your question is there a way to combine audio with visual, and you can mash it all up and have a single file? Yes, there are. There's quite a few ways, in fact. You could use a tool, for instance, on a Windows machine. I know most of you guys use Mac, sorry about that, but I use Windows. Camtasia for Windows, for instance, lets you import audio. You then bring in video as well as still images and create another presentation from that. Not as good? You're right. Well, the Camtasia route gives you actually a video at the end of it that comprises all of that. You've also got a new service that launched about a month ago called present.me that lets you do that. I've signed up for that. I haven't had time to try it yet, but that lets you add video and audio, and then you on a webcam or any other audio or audio-visual content to create a new presentation. You have a question? Got it. Yeah. Yeah, there are lots. One particular one does not spring to mind right now. But new services are appearing all the time. And indeed, if you Googled the question, you would find the answers that you have. I don't use any one of those in particular myself. Sorry? Webinar software? Like GoToWebinar, WebEx, that kind of thing? Yeah, it's a kind of a clunky workaround way of doing it, though. Plus, it's pricey, actually. That's the only, but you can do it. And if you're in a big corporation, you've probably got the budget or something. So we're going to talk now about community, which to me is now actually the most interesting aspect of podcasting. We're looking at a definition of community. You're looking at online communities that can translate into offline communities, but it's kind of important to understand what we mean when we use that word community. So we're looking at people who are not physically close, anywhere, connected via the net to other people with common interests. That is one definition of a community, and that certainly applies to the podcast series that Shell Holtz and I do. If you look at engagement, the process of forming an attachment between a person and a brand. That's the kind of, I suppose, traditional description of brand engagement, certainly. But there's a more nuanced way of thinking about engagement that goes beyond marketing, and we could indeed spend the rest of this session talking about defining engagement. What we're talking about is more the informal, emotional-led method of creating connections between people that transcend any particular pigeonholing from a marketing point of view, that still has validity from a business point of view, and that really permeates much of what I've been hearing today, this kind of informal method of engaging. Podcasting can help you do that. Our podcast definitely is in that area. I've thrown this slide in because I think it's relevant to a lot of things we talk about, but when you're talking about, in the context of podcasting, and indeed could be anything actually, the brand is not the podcaster. It's an individual. And it may seem an obvious thing, but I see so many people all the time talking about being a friend of a brand. You can't be the friend of a brand. It's an inanimate thing. You can only be a friend of the brand manager. And that's a point we make a lot in our podcast. This is Shell and me that you're relating to, not the brand name of our podcast, although we often get accused of almost being synonymous with the brand name. That's actually a good thing, I think. So something to think about. So how do you go about actively engaging? Now, this slide was taken from a presentation made at Like Minds University in February by someone called Joanne Jacobs, who has presented here before, who is in Australia now, and I know I saw her tweeting earlier, so Joanne, if you're watching, hi. These are very good points you made in February, that's why I'm using them. How do you go about actively engaging? You have questions to ask that help you answer that question. The how, the why, the what, and the where, effectively. And Joanne has enumerated those very nicely there. So these need to be in your mind as among the things you'd be asking yourself as to why are you doing a podcast in the first place, and engaging. How do you do the engaging? You got the why and those kinds of questions to answer that help you get to the how. I'm going to give you the example of the podcast that I've been doing with Shell Holtz for the last 7 years. So a history on that. We started in January 2005. He in the States, me in the UK now, 60 to 90 minutes every Monday. We used to do twice a week, but it was just too much. We started this as a hobby. It's gone way beyond that now, and I'll tell you why in a second. We're getting, well now actually, we're getting average monthly downloads about 30,000 copies of each MP3 file. We have a global audience. About 50% of it is in the United States, close to 40 or maybe 30s in the UK, then there's Canada, and then there's a long tail of listeners in lots of other countries around continental Europe. We have listeners in China, Australia, other places in Southeast Asia, and so forth. We have had a listener in Antarctica at, I think, the American Research Station there, but I don't think he's listening anymore. Maybe he's been moved from there. But, and we have 3 commercial sponsors, people who pay us money to do this. And I wish I could tell you I'm retiring next week. Unfortunately not. But it pays our host of serving costs, and we're happy to have those sponsors in any case. They're good people. Lawrence Reagan Communications, a firm based in Chicago, who do events amongst things, publishing aimed at internal communicators and public relations people in particular. Custom Scoop, which is a media monitoring service based in New Hampshire, I think if I'm right, New Hampshire in the United States, and Tembo Social in Canada. So those are the three sponsors that we have. This is just showing you downloads that I mentioned, those 30,000. We were astonished at how it's grown over the years. We do surveys. We survey our listeners to find out what they want. We listen to our listeners when they tell us things and adjust our offering accordingly. How does it work? For us, it goes with that question, compelling content. Content is absolute king. I will argue that with anyone who disagrees. Not context. Context, the queen. Content is king in the right context. And that's, I was at an event the other day. I'm quoting Brian Solis, actually. I was at an event the other day where it kind of resonated with me because I believe that very strongly. Content, first and foremost, certainly for podcasting, is paramount to attracting an audience and keeping the audience. Not the only thing, though, for podcasting, certainly not. Ask for listeners' opinions. We do that in every single show. When they tell us their opinions, we include them in the following show. So we have a means by which people can do that. They can email us comments. They can record a comment and send it in. They can record a comment and put it on Audioboom and give us the URL, and we'll grab the recording and stick it in the show. Loads of ways they can tell us opinions. We've yet to not play, I think there's 2 times we have not played a listener's recording. And one of them I remember well, it was just far too long, it was like 10 minutes. And we have a 3-minute limit on comments, otherwise the show gets too long. We suggest frequent commenters might want to become reporters of the show. I'll talk about that in a second. We talk about what the listeners say, whether they're commenting or not, what we found in some of the community places we've established. And we provide a platform for listeners' comments, all those various places, which I'll show you in a second, and the show itself. So we provide places for community to spontaneously, I was going to say combust, probably the wrong word, spontaneously grow. So in a sense, if Shell and I were hit by a bus tomorrow, the show would go on. We've had guest hosts doing it when he and I have been unable to do it. That's happened twice, where we've both been away and have not been able to do the show at all. So we encourage the 3 things customers like to do online. And I'm not going to quiz you by saying what are those 3 things. I'm going to tell you in a second. We make it easy for listeners to get hold of the show. So we have our website. It's on iTunes. I have to tell you, by the way, ask any podcaster. iTunes is responsible for 90% of the subscriptions to our show. And when iTunes started back in, I think it was 2006, it totally changed the landscape, their entry into the market, like so much Apple does. We ask friends to talk about it. We don't pimp the show too much, but our friends will talk about it. Anytime we publish a show, a tweet goes out, it gets retweeted like hell. And that's what our friends do. We had to ask for it originally, but that now just happens. People will retweet the links to the show. We offer compelling content, I mentioned that, and build community. That's what I'm going to talk about right now. So the 3 things customers like to do online, that is at the heart of our show. Share ideas. Example, let's improve the next product or service together. That's a metaphor for what people like to do. Share product knowledge. Here's what I know, hope it helps you, that kind of thing. Help peers solve problems. I had the same problem, here's what I did. Our show, every episode, is peppered with examples of that. And that's one of the things, in my view, that makes it compelling. Because people think, I'm going to find out something of value if I listen to this show next time. And by the way, this is a dry topic. It's a niche audience. Public relations, internal communication, business, tech, that kind of intersection. Yet 30,000 downloads. And indeed, the last listener survey shows we've got people who listen who aren't in the communication business at all. We've got dentists. We've got people working in factories. We've got all sorts of interesting people who've told us they listen to the show. So building community. Integral sponsor participation. And these are some of the, I've got a clip here actually. That should
Hello,
play.
this is Jen Zingsheim with today's Media Monitoring Minute. I came across an interesting discussion via Twitter last week. Judy Gambita, a PR and communications pro from Canada, who you absolutely should be following on Twitter, asks if listing tweets under blog comments is disingenuous. This is a really interesting question, and in my mind, worth exploring and asking. I can recall a number of times seeing a post with X number of comments listed below it and thought, ooh, hot topic, I should go check out what people are discussing, only to note that there were only a handful of actual comments followed by a whole bunch of generic responses or retweets on Twitter. It's interesting for me to note how my attention immediately drops off when I realize this, and I think I know why it does. To me, a healthy and engaged comment stream, at least on the PR blogs I follow, means that people are thinking, discussing, and debating. A bunch of notifications of retweets means only that people found a post interesting, which is important and worth knowing, but just not the same. To check out Custom Scoop's media monitoring services, just visit customscoop.com/FIR for a free trial.
Hey there, it's David Bader at Tembo Social. All of us are stronger than one of us. It's an oldie, but a goodie.
Hi, Shallow Neville. It's Jenny Fukumoto.
Okay, so what I wanted to show there was just give you some clips of how those are sponsors' messages. Sorry, those are sponsors' messages who have made their content an integral part of the show. So you heard Custom Scoop. That is a sponsor message. It's kind of like their 30-second ad slot. And yet they're giving something as an integral part of the content, not an advertising message. They mention get a free trial at the end. That's it. I pressed the wrong button, so the second two kind of went on together. But you had Reagan talking about one of their events coming up, but in a way that talked about what people are looking for that they could help you get. Entertaining, a lot of background noise. The person who did it recorded it at an event. And the Tempo Social one is a bit more dry, like an announcement, but you've got the personality of the voice doing it. So they're all different, but they're integral. We've also got reporters, people who contribute reports each week. A guy called Michael Netzley, who's a professor at the Singapore Management University in Singapore, an expat American. Dan York, a guy who works for the Internet Society, who's in New Hampshire on the east coast of the States. And they provide reports. Michael talks about what's going on in Southeast Asia from a communication point of view. Dan's the techie. He's often talking about tech as it relates to the listeners and their interests. So a brief clip from these guys, if it plays.
Hi, Shell and Neville, FIR listeners. This is Michael Netzley in Singapore. This week in Asia, we have officially entered the Year of the Dragon. Last week, when I was down with laryngitis, we had Chinese New Year on January 23rd, and we have begun the Year of the Dragon, which is generally considered a good sign under the Chinese zodiac, and lots of folks...
Hey, Shell and Neville, Stan, we're coming at you from Keene, New Hampshire. I want to talk today about Apple's great big fail, in my opinion, but before that, let me just talk about a new tool and service that helps those of us who are fans of Google Wave. Now, I realize we're probably in a minority, but many of us found Google Wave, to be a powerful way to do collaboration between people, especially in multi-document or multi-author environments. Well, you know, last November, Google finally announced that they were going to be killing off Wave here in...
So there you have two correspondents who give you an insight. I keep forgetting about the microphone here. Give you insight into the kind of content they provide that adds variety and richness and just interesting content from different voices in the show. And I'm not suggesting, incidentally, that all of this is instantly within a week of you starting a podcast, you've got this. This has taken us a lot of time to get to this stage. But we spent the time and the energy and the effort. It was well worth it because we now have a community in the show that engages with the community of listeners. But all of the contributors, the sponsors, our two reporters are fantastic in the content they provide. So a good third to 50% of the show is made up by those contributors, not just Shell and me talking. So you've got here two commenters who frequent call-ins, Heidi Miller, these both in the United States, Heidi Miller and Ike Piggott, who contribute opinion on something we've talked about in the show typically. And it's just terrific. Again, it stimulates typically further comment in ongoing shows from other members in the community.
We're going to hear now from our good friend and occasional commenter here, Heidi Miller.
Hi, Shell. Hi, Neville. It's Heidi Miller from www.heidi-miller.com. And I'm calling today to leave some comments about the chapstick controversy. For those of you who haven't heard, the brand Chapstick recently posted an ad featuring a woman's posterior instead of its usual images of empowered women, and fans objected to this ad. And in an enormous social media faux pas, Chapstick decided to delete all negative comments from its Facebook page and then proceeded to call its fans spammers. That's the quick summary. Actually, my favorite summary...
Hello, Shell. Hello, Neville. This is Ike Piggott in Birmingham, Alabama. Wanted to share a new tool that I discovered with you. It's called IFTTT, and it's IFTTT. It stands for if this, then that. And what it is a nice little engine for gluing together...
So, two examples. Indeed, those two in particular are right in the three things people like to do online. They're sharing knowledge. Here's what I know, hope it helps you kind of thing. And you get that kind of thing in your podcast. As I mentioned, it adds to the richness of the overall content that makes the overall a compelling listening experience. So that's part of that community. Building that community, we have tools to help us. And again, it starts with the compelling content, unquestionably. But nowadays, the usual stuff. When we started, it was just a blog. That was it. We still got that. But now there's a Twitter handle. There's FriendFeed. Does anyone use FriendFeed, by the way? It's still around. So we have a Google Plus page. We have a Facebook page. But FriendFeed is the place people prefer to be. And we've tried to get them onto Facebook. No, they like to be on FriendFeed. And in fact, we've got, I'm not sure we can see it on the screenshot, about 417 members of that community who are active. And like all things, you've got small numbers who are active out of your big listenership. Most people listen and you never hear from them until you ask them to do a survey or something. But you can see on the screenshot some examples. I did that screenshot the other day of the kinds of comments people do. Every time we publish a show, it gets posted there as well, things like that. Interestingly, in the last month, we suddenly got people liking our Facebook page. And we're kind of bemused as to what is driving that, because nothing we can determine is driving people to click the like button. So it could be that that's beginning to resurrect itself. They're a different group who are in FriendFeed. But reality, 4 or 5 places you think, wow, have I got time to do that? You've got to do it, because you've got to be where your community is, not where you want them to be. If your community is on some obscure forum somewhere, that's where you've got to be. And you can work hard to try and persuade them to come someplace else, or make a decision that you're going to have 2 sets of communities. Not uncommon. I could think of a couple I use that are traditional forums, been there a while, and the logins, the moderation, all that. They've also got Facebook, totally different community. So you have to have that in your mind as well. So what are other podcasters doing? I'm not sure we've got time to listen to clips from these. I've got quite a few. But these are, in our website, we post links to what other podcasters in our area of interest are doing. As you can see, there's a lot of people doing podcasting related to the topics we talk about, that intersection, business communication technology. Many of them with a public relations focus entirely. Most of them are in the United States, some are in Canada. There's a couple not on that list, but are in my player.fm playlist in the UK. There are a few here, I would add, that are related to our area. But as you can see, you've got a rich, different type of content that each person brings that you might want to check out as well. So we're not the only show in town. Take a look at some of these folks too. We're going to skip the listing, actually. I want to get to this one, because this is a very good example. Shell found this recently, and I thought it was great. A customer service example of how to use podcasting. Does anyone here use Evernote? Okay, so you know the product. Just take a listen to this on engaging with, let's call them super fans of your brand in a kind of thought leadership way. I've got this clip to play.
Let's get into some Twitter questions.
This is a podcast.
Okay, here we go. Sheoji. Love the app.
Thank you.
Thanks. But, is it possible for you guys to add the word count feature to Evernote? And specifically, I think this person is talking about Mac and maybe iOS?
Yes. In fact, I got to tell you, I was actually surprised that word count's not in our Mac version, because I thought we had added it. But apparently we only added it to Windows, because I think it lives in a status bar in the Windows version, the word count and character count and a few other things. And I think on the Mac, we don't have a status bar, so we'll need a different place to add it. But it is definitely going into the Mac. It is actually one of my own personal most requested features. So that is happening. I'm not sure about iOS. That might be a little bit weird user experience-wise.
Yeah. So just to give you an idea, that was a podcast of 2 people at Evernote, the product guy and one of their founders, I think. They do this regularly, where a listener had suggested a comment, and they didn't know they didn't have it in the Mac version of the product. So they engaged, and as a result of that, they added it to the product. So there's an example of how the fan was able to feel comfortable in sending in a comment that he did, and he knew they'd listened to it, that he suggested something. So, good example. Promoting it, well, in promoting a podcast, it's all great to have compelling content and starting to have listeners, but you need to get the word out. And you ask your friends, sure, but you need to also do it on a more professional basis than that. So, Twitter, status updates in all the social networking places, yeah, you've got to do that because it's a crowded space out there. We've started experimenting with a tool called Gaggle Amp, and that is a device that lets you, if you will, tweet your description of anything you want, linking to your podcast, for instance, with a special URL that other people will retweet, and they'll win prizes. It's kind of like an influencer marketing approach to it, where if they get more points through the retweets and the linking to their communities, they win prizes, and you can define the prize. So we have prizes, for instance, wall clocks with the FIR logo, mugs with our logo, things like that. People like getting that stuff. But that is responsible for a huge uptake in attention. Gaggle Amp is something you might want to check out. It's brand new, it's still in beta, I think. Worth a look. Listeners, well, the likes, the retweets, the plus ones, all of that. So we socialize all our content with the things you expect to see nowadays. Now, likes is a big topic, and we could talk about that, but I'm not going to, other than to say, I often wonder what the point of likes is, other than a volume thing to say it's a quantity thing. What does it actually mean? But that's another topic. We have them, nevertheless. People do pay attention to them. So the retweets are quite important. The plus ones, not so much. But retweets are a primary way through which people discover our content when they see their communities tweeting. So we make sure that we've got the buttons everywhere that people can click if they want to, and even on mobile as well. We've also started experimenting with Google Hangouts, which actually may address one of your questions about adding content, our colleague who was here a minute ago, about different content. So we do live shows occasionally. We've got one coming up in the middle of June, in fact, which is probably going to be a Google Hangout on air. But we did one recently, this is just an example to show you, with some folks who at the Le Web conference in Paris, in fact, last November. So here's a clip from that.
So it's just different priorities, different way of looking things. And for me, you know, the ability to sort of experience that, I think, makes me a more effective communicator. Le Web was full of last-minute scheduling changes, but that's just the way they do things there.
So a short example. That goes on for quite a bit, that clip. But that's a fellow called Eric Schwartzman in Los Angeles, who's also a podcaster, I would add, does a very good one on the record online. And here we had a panel of folks who'd been at Le Web talking about their experiences of it, and we did it as a video rather than just audio to appeal to a different type of audience. We also published the audio recording as an audio podcast. So you had multiple ways you could consume that content. People love that, to be frank. It's easy to share. As someone mentioned, I think it was Alan Moore, mentioned Creative Commons. And ours is all eminently shareable via Creative Commons. You know exactly the conditions upon which you can share the content. So that's a given. You need to do that. That helps your discoverability and helps the shareability of your content as well. Today it's a brand more than just the one podcast. We do a series. We do interviews of interesting people. We have book reviews. We got the live show. We have speakers and speeches where we sometimes will record someone speaking with permission of that individual and the event organizer, do it as a podcast. So we've expanded it out into a kind of a brand, a series, let's say. You don't have to do that too, but this is over time it's happened. So I'm here in the UK, as I mentioned. Shell Holtz is in California, and there are easy ways to get hold of us, and that's where you'll find more information about FIR, www.forummediarelease.biz, and all those places I mentioned. If you Google us, you'll find us quite easily. I hope that's been interesting enough for you to get a sense of how to and community building, and with that, I reach the end of the session.